Well, Monday Fun Day. Welcome into the college basketball tip-off show powered by WagerTalk.com. It is the Sweet 16 edition. And how was your weekend? Was it a chalky weekend for you? Was it were you cashing tickets with the underdogs early? Because the last couple of days, it was all about the favorites here. And in Houston's case, while they had to not only take on Texas A&M, they had to take on the refs too. And here to discuss it all is our good friends Bryan Power and Drew Martin in the house. And gentlemen, what a weekend it was, to say the least here. We got some ups, some downs. We got some, dogs barking early in the round of 64, not so much in the round of 32. Tell me here, BP, your initial thoughts on what you saw over this weekend, 64 and round of 32.
Well, Joe, they said coming into the tournament, the round of 32 is a great time to fade the public and go contrarian. And by God, that was not true over the last 2 days whatsoever. It was the exact opposite happened. It's a funny thing when people use small sample sizes to, show trends. We were joking about that off the air before we started. But yeah, a very, very chalky Sweet 16. I guess that's the big takeaway coming in. 13 of the top 14 teams at Ken Palm still alive. Auburn is the exception. I'm very sorry about that, Drew Martin. Didn't mean to rub salt in the wounds there. But, I know there's some people lamenting this. Like, oh, where are the upsets? Where's Cinderella? Joe, I got to be honest with you. I like when the best teams are left. We get some good matchups. I mean, you look across the board here, what we've got on Thursday and Friday. We've got a lot of high-quality matchups. The teams that we thought were true contenders to win this thing, for the most part, all of those teams are still alive, still in. So, it works both ways. I mean, last year, there was upsets galore, right? But you look at that Final Four, it was so goofy with all those teams, no top seeds. I will warn people, though, this will be my final point. Those who are, convinced that the chalk will continue to walk, the last time we had a tournament, a Sweet 16 field, I guess, so chalk heavy, where all the 1 and 2 seeds made it through, only one seed and 1 2 seed made it through to the Final Four. So just because the 1 and 2 seeds are 8-0 so far in the tournament doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have as much success this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly here with what we learned, Drew, over the weekend. And a big shout out to those of you joining us live here today on this Monday Fun Day here, Sweet 16 edition. Go ahead, hit that like button if you could, hit the subscribe button. Shout out to Instagram, to X, to YouTube. Those of you that are watching us via YouTube Shorts, we certainly appreciate it. And we're trying, it always helps, Drew, to kind of get some perspective after a day or so here, because what we saw in the round of 64, like BB was talking, wasn't the same thing like we saw in the round of 62. The cream rise to the top. Sometimes not all at once like we saw, but eventually what we got last year, Drew, was kind of an anomaly. I mean, the San Diego States, the FAUs of the world. Usually this thing when it comes around to the 16 Elite 8 and 4, we're at least a number 1 seed somewhere along the line. I think last year was the first time we actually had one where there was no number 1 seeds left by the time we got to the championship.
Sure, Joe. And yeah, we won't get San Diego State UConn for the national championship because we'll actually get it in the Sweet 16.
Yes.
Interesting there with the last year's national championship. They're going in that 5-1 matchup. And I'll tell you, Joe, BP kind of hit on it a little bit. But 15-1 in the 16 games of the round of 32 on Saturday and Sunday. That's what the favorites went straight up. 15-1 and 11-5 against the spread. And it makes for a little bit deeper of a Sweet 16, meaning, that 1 and 2s kind of making it all the way. Well, they're going to have a little bit more difficult matchups than in years past because a lot of the chalk did win. So therefore, you get kind of, I guess, I agree with BP. I kind of like this because a lot of the matchups here are going to be kind of marquee games. So some really good matchups. So I know we're going to look at a couple of them here, Joe, but overall, even though my Auburn Tigers went down to Yale, shout out to the Ivy League there. I thought it was interesting. He pointed out the fact of, the top teams from Ken Palm all being there except for Auburn. It's something, maybe Ken Palm needs a tip of the cap here because his numbers were right on in the tournament.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. Ken Palm, for the most part, kind of called a lot of these, especially some of, there were a lot of people yesterday hoping for the Dukes of the world to fall, and yet Ken Palm had them as double-digit, winners over there. I mean, Purdue was a 10, 11-point favorite for a reason. Obviously, we saw that. And it's a great reminder that while these mid-major programs are great, they're feel-good stories, there's a reason why their best players aren't at Purdue or at Duke or at some of these other places. You know what I mean? It's a good reminder, BP, that there are levels to this. Don't get caught up with the recency bias of it and the emotion of it. And, it happens very easily to bettors.
Yeah, and it's easy to say now, but I remember when the bracket was released, and if you guys go back to that first week of championship week, you'll remember it. I said this when the bracket was released to Mark Zinno. I said, there were a lot of upsets in those smaller conferences in the conference tournaments. So we weren't necessarily getting the best teams. And I thought you look at the 12 through 15 seeds, that crop this year, which obviously did not do particularly well. There was 2 12 seeds, one 13, 114, one. But that was one of the weaker crops in recent years we've had, guys, I think, of 12 through 15 seeds because of the upsets from championship week. I mean, you look, there was a team like UAB was a 12 seed this year. UAB had one of the easiest routes to winning the American ever. They beat Temple in the final, for crying out loud, of their conference tournament. And that's a team that obviously wouldn't have been there without winning their conference tournament. So it's easy to say now on Monday, but maybe we should have seen this coming. It was a weak crop of 12 through 15 seeds, and I think that's a big reason why we've got so many of the big boys still standing.
Think about the way it ended on Friday, Drew. We had, the late slate of games, St. Mary's. You go down the list there of these dogs that all not only won, but they won outright. People waking up Saturday going, all right, here we go. We're getting ready to roll. It just goes to show you that any team can be beaten on any given day, but the longer they play, the cream eventually rises to the top. Hence, you watched Yale last night. Did you think that was even remotely close to the same team that played Auburn on Friday there, Drew? I mean, it's not even remotely. Now, styles make fights, don't get me wrong, but I thought Auburn would have wiped the floor with him, but hey, any given day, right?
Yeah, it's very volatile, Joe. I think that's part of what you were getting at there. I mean, Yale coming out, beating Auburn, and then not really looking the part against San Diego State, which at the same time, San Diego State down the stretch run in the Mountain West was playing really good basketball and scoring a lot, not like, in years past, just kind of relying on their defense. So I've kind of almost felt like San Diego State was riding a little bit under the radar, but then the Mountain West not doing as good was kind of making me pump the brakes on betting the Aztecs. And Joe, I do want to point out one thing because we had some comments on last Monday's show because we were doing a little question and answer time with the chat, which is always fun. But people were kind of coming at me because I was like, Auburn, I don't know. I'm not betting them, obviously rooting for them as an alumni. And I brought up the fact I don't think they're as tough as they've been in years past, going for the rebound, getting the loose ball. And I almost feel like Auburn was of the profile of like a college football team that like runs up the score on their opponents, their weaker opponents. But then when they play like the big boys, the offense just doesn't look the same. And sure enough, that's kind of like what happened. Yale kind of played some defense they weren't ready for, and it didn't click the same. So these matchups, we saw it with Oakland Oakland in their big win over Kentucky. If you change up the defense and the opposition isn't ready for it, that is a great handicap. If you can kind of see that coming and the other sports bettors, the odds makers don't see that exact profile coming, you're facing a defense that you haven't seen much, and it really kind of makes your offense not kind of hum the same. that's a great handicap if you can kind of find that aspect in your handicapping.
Yeah, it's very good point here, Drew. I mean, that's why the little reprieve here that we have, kind of reevaluate, clear the mind here a little bit, and get ready to dive in. So we've got the Sweet 16 ready to go. I think we'll all agree that there's one team up at the top, and that, of course, is UConn. They'll take on San Diego State. I find some fascinating matchups in this one. I'm going to ask you guys to pick one of these games and tell me which one is intriguing to you. And a big shout out to the chat room here. And again, guys, if you have any questions about these upcoming games here, drop them in. We'll get to as many as we can as the show moves on. Shout out to Titan CT, who didn't want to rub it in, Drew, but he had Yale on Friday. That was pretty disgusting, that bet there, Titan CT, but way to cash it. Daryl, Killer J in the house, still working on that jump shot. It is a pleasure to see you guys. A very happy Monday. Hope it was a profitable weekend. But we got it, BP. You've had a chance now, kind of kick back, relax here a little bit. So tell me, which one of these games is intriguing to you, and which way might you be leaning in one of them?
Well, I talked about this on WagerTalk today this morning. The game that immediately jumped out to me from a line perspective, guys, was Bama and North Carolina. I think this should be lined closer to a pick 'em. Personally, I like to do a lot of comparing lines, and you look at North Carolina in the last game. They were laying a comparable number to Michigan State. Basically, right now, I believe the market, it was at 4 across the board earlier this morning, and we saw some 4.5s pop up. Well, that's where North Carolina, Michigan State closed. And Joe, if Alabama played Michigan State tomorrow on a neutral floor, Alabama would be a couple point favorite. I'd have them -2, as a matter of fact. So the fact that this line is the same as North Carolina's last game, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, North Carolina obviously covered against Michigan State despite the slow start, and we need to give them credit for that. But Alabama, as frustrating as they can be, I was sweating out Friday night against Charleston. They were up 30. You think the game's just over. And this team keeps playing 100 miles an hour. I was like, guys, just run the clock out. Stop doing this. Why are your walk-ons just getting the inbounds pass and sprinting 90 feet for a layup? What are we doing? I get that they are deficient at the defensive end. There's issues with Nate Oates' team. I just think they should be getting more respect from a pure numbers perspective, Joe. Alabama, it seems that they've actually been underrated in this tournament now in all 3 games. I thought way too much. The line moved way too low, obviously, in the Charleston game. They covered against Grand Canyon as well. Ultimately, as most of these games do, though, it will come down to 3-point variance, specifically when it comes to Bama shooting the 3, because we know they're going to put up a high volume of 3. They I think, attempt around 30 per game. Against Grand Canyon, Alabama was only 8 for 31, but they shot the lights out against Charleston, obviously. North Carolina opponents this year, away from home, this is a stunning number, have shot just 29.5% from 3. I watched North Carolina quite a bit, Joe. It's not like they do a great job guarding the 3-point line. I've seen a lot of teams miss open 3-pointers against the Tar Heels this year. And one last thing I'll point out with North Carolina, not saying this is enough that they're going to lose to Alabama, but they have not had to travel very much over the last month or so. The first 2 games were in Charlotte. ACC tournament was in DC. They only played 2 true road games since Valentine's Day. One of them was against Duke. Obviously, a very short trip. The other one was against Virginia. So let's see. Obviously, they have to go out west now. Let's see if that has any adverse effect on them whatsoever.
You just got to worry with. I mean, Bama's defense is beyond pitiful. Grand Canyon wins that game if they could find anybody that can actually make a shot when it mattered the most there down the stretch. I mean, come on here. So I certainly don't put a lot of stock in Bama being able to put together, 3, what are we going to need now? 3 absolutely unbelievable efforts on the defensive side against the best competition. Oh, yikes, Alabama. But hey, you got to be in it to win it, BP.
Yeah, and I'll say this. third straight Alabama game now to open this tournament where it's their three totals are the three highest
Yep.
totals we have seen in the last 30 years of the tournament. And certainly North Carolina, Joe, to your point, they're not going to miss shots like Grand Canyon did. They're a willing dance partner. It's very hard for me to see, both those teams not putting up a ton of points on Thursday evening in Los Angeles.
Yeah, fascinating stories. We keep saying there's no Cinderella, Drew, but I'm laughing because there's an 11 seed in this tournament still. And it's North Carolina State. I'm fairly certain not a lot of brackets had North Carolina State in the Sweet 16 unless you were BP and you were 3 bourbons in trying to fill it out. I would imagine not a lot of people had North Carolina State getting to maybe the Elite 8, hell, even the Sweet 16. But I find them fascinating. I think Clemson looks like better than a 6 seed. I thought they were a little undervalued heading into this tournament. So when you look at the final here, the final 8 games, 16 teams, Drew, which is one of the games that stuck out to you a little coming up?
Well, I mean, you bring up NC State, the Wolfpack, double-digit seed in the Sweet 16 here, and that game that went to overtime, and then they end up covering at least the opening number. That was a wild kind of ride if you were betting the Wolfpack like I was. And DJ Burns down there, he's got that little lefty hook. He's a big boy, a tough cover here for Marquette. That's going to be an interesting situation in terms of how that plays out on the court. That's going to be a fun one to watch. And NC State, I mean, don't look now. If they're not the hottest, they're one of the hottest teams in the country just in terms of rattling off these wins. Keep in mind, they won the ACC tournament to get in here, and they've just kind of kept that ball rolling. Also, the Alabama UNC game popped off to me, mostly from a totals standpoint here, Joe. I mean, BP brought up the fact of their first couple games being the highest total games in NCAA tournament. And in their last game against Grand Canyon, one of the things about betting college basketball totals is I go to how you played recently. And in that first game, they scored 109 points. Then they come back and just score like 72. And that game fell under by 40 points. That's something you got to circle and keep in mind because a lot of times it doesn't just change that much. And if it does, pay attention to why it changed because maybe they're doing something different. And of course, their shots not falling affected how that game played out. But man, a team that just played in a game where their total fell under by 40 points, and now we're getting a total near 175. I don't know. That kind of makes me want to bet the under here just because that is a high total. You're going to need a clean ride. And last game out, it didn't get anywhere near that, Joe.
No, it didn't. But, winning is contagious. And it's amazing to me how some teams, they kind of forget to lose. And, once you get on that streak, it's like anything else. Everything seems like it's going to go in. You got to look at some of these teams and go, at some point, this has got to end, right? Like, because a month ago, you sucked. Like, none of us even thought you were going to be able to get out of the ACC, much less get to this point. But I do think it is fascinating. Also, PC there, Professor Chris in the chat room brings up a solid point. Rye is better than bourbon. I will give you that, especially if you're looking at, like Jefferson single barrel, outstanding, Buffalo Trace. I am with you there, but just give me a straw, and I think we're good to go one way or the other. We do have some interesting, shall we say, underdogs coming up here too. I think we can all agree that NC State's been a hell of a run, but how far does Marquette make it, BP? Yeah. I mean, what's the ceiling for this team?
Well, I'm glad you brought up Marquette because they're sort of the forgotten team. They beat a good Colorado team in the second round,
yes.
Right? I mean, a lot of, a big reason that the second round was so chalky is you did have a lot of games where there was a talent mismatch, right? Like, look at what the biggest blowouts were. Purdue, Utah State. That had a big spread. Duke, James Madison. Obviously a talent gap there. Marquette had to face a very strong Colorado team. And you have to wonder if Colorado wasn't playing, its third game in 5 days and didn't get off to the slow start. How did that go? But you look at Marquette. They have that profile. We started the show talking about Ken Palm. Teams inside the top 25 of both adjusted offensive and defensive efficiency. Historically, you have to be there to cut down the nets. Marquette is in that grouping. And I look at Marquette, an interesting way to bet them, and I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. Are they live plus 220 to win that region? Because as
Mm,
much as NC State's a hot team right now, do we think NC State's going to beat Marquette? And if you don't, that Houston Duke game, that feels like it could go either way. And if you bet Marquette right now, plus 220 to win the South, you could have a hedging opportunity in the Elite Eight. I don't know. I think that might be kind of a good bet right now. Marquette, I wasn't
mhm.
huge on Marquette coming to this tournament, but you kind of like the way the draw is from them because they've got the easier game in that region right now.
Yeah. And you got a coach that's been there and done that before, and Shaka is smart. He's been to a Final Four before. My only question with Marquette was I was wondering what was going to happen. You took Kolek out of the equation for about a month, and now you put him back into the equation. I'm wondering, how is that going to work out? Is he healthy enough? Are the other guys, is it just simple drag and drop them in? But I think what happened with him, BP, is that with Kolek being out, it gave all the other guys a chance to kind of get their groove on, right? It gave those guys a chance to get some confidence because they still had to win some games and compete without him. Then when he comes back in, the guy is by far has to be one of the smartest point guards in college basketball we've seen in a long time. I mean, this kid is phenomenal. They play fast. They can score on anybody. Was Marquette on your radar, Drew, coming into this? We were all worried about Kolek, and they seem to have been the forgotten team, but I don't think anybody should be forgetting about them right now, especially at the price that they've got.
I mean, Joe, in terms of filling out the bracket, yeah, they were only because I felt like they got a pretty good run there. Western Kentucky and
Mm,
then the Florida Colorado winner, which I did think Colorado was a pretty good team. I agree with you guys, but getting that win, now they face NC State, the only double digit seed left. So if you're picking kind of a team that has gotten the benefit of the doubt on the way, I would say I would put that team as Marquette. Now, up against NC State, I think an 11 seed, they were underseeded. And I kind of brought
right.
up DJ Burns. That's going to be a tough kind of a defensive matchup in this round of Sweet 16. And then the winner going to face the Duke Houston. I'm just kind of looking at the bracket here, Joe, of teams with a good chance to kind of make a. How about Purdue? I mean, Zach Edley talking about, tough defensive matchups. Man, that guy's
Yep.
pretty good when you watch him. And Gonzaga, I think they're going to be up against it a little bit. So I like the Boilermakers there. It's not a tough trip from Purdue to Detroit. It shouldn't
Yep.
be too tough of a trip for them. So the 1 seed Purdue, I kind of like that matchup against Gonzaga in the Sweet 16. Kind of first look, Joe.
It's interesting, too, because Purdue, I think, didn't they beat Marquette this year? And I think they played Tennessee, and I think they even played the Zags
Yeah,
also, right,
Yeah,
BP?
yeah,
They played them all, and
yeah.
I think
So
they beat them all already.
and
in
Gonzaga.
a
Yeah,
row, that yeah, there's a chance that if they played them in Maui, there's a chance that they could
Yes.
repeat in the exact order the same run they had in Maui if they beat Gonzaga, beat Tennessee, and then met Marquette in the Final Four. They could have the exact same run of 3 games that they did in Maui, which is quite the coincidence.
yeah.
Wow. Well, the only question we all got to ask is how much faith do we have in Matt Painter? Anyone?
Yeah,
Bueller?
yeah,
No.
yeah.
About as much faith as I have in Rick Barnes. How in the hell Tennessee won that game going 1 for 89 from 3 is beyond me. But they ended up squeaking a win out, and they advance here. So there are some interesting teams here that I think if they win and advance, in other words, how much faith do we have in Arizona with the way Clemson is playing, BP?
You and I have talked, Joe, both on and off air about Arizona throughout this college basketball season. And sometimes when they're at their best, you ask yourself, as a matter of fact, this was a joke we said, how does this team ever lose a game?
Yeah.
Arizona is absolutely on the short list of teams that could win this whole thing, but they will have an occasional dud that makes you wonder, like, what the heck is this? Is this the same team? Did they not care today? Obviously, they knew they were going to have a pretty easy time in the Pac-12, so I don't know if there was kind of a mid-season malaise there. I kind of like, again, kind of what I talked about with Marquette. I would expect Arizona to advance past Clemson, and the North Carolina, Alabama, that's a pretty tough matchup. So, Arizona was the favorite. They were, remember, the favorites coming into the tournament were the 3-1 seeds and then the 2 seed Arizona to win their region. So I could absolutely see Arizona making the Final Four at least, potentially against a UConn, who is the presumed favorite at this point. So yeah, I like Arizona. They're a team that, again, checks all the boxes analytically. Top, they're near the top in both adjusted offensive and defensive efficiency. There's a lot to like about the Wildcats.
Did anybody have Oregon advancing here? Because they ran out of gas against Creighton. And I guess maybe that's the big worry about Creighton, right? Is that if the shots aren't falling and they take a ton from the outside, what happens then? I mean, they just really outlasted Oregon in that double over. Oregon just ran out of steam, and give Creighton credit, but my goodness, I can't think of two. We just saw Tennessee go, Dalton Connect, the best player in the world. Great. He was like 4 of 23 in the game. It was almost head scratching here. I don't trust either of those two teams here, though. That's the problem, BP.
Well, they both lost their first conference tournament game too. So,
yes,
if you're looking
big
picture, historically, neither of those teams is going to win the championship. It's funny. I think, sort of rhetorically asked, what happens when Creighton isn't hitting their threes? We've seen it, and it's an ugly story, right? I mean, when they lose bad. I mean, they had some of those. Well, didn't they have just an awful performance against UNLV? Like mid in a one of those MTEs or whatever. So, I mean, they're obviously the only team that beat UConn down the stretch. But yeah, I mean, again, 3-point variance. If we could all predict it ahead of time, we'd be multimillionaires. But that is a tough call. The Creighton Tennessee game. I think of all the Sweet 16 matchups, that one seems the most even to me, and the one that, as of Monday, I'm in the least rush to bet.
So I have to bring it up here. Drew, did you watch any of that Houston A&M game at all last night?
Absolutely. That was a great one, Joe. And
phenomenal.
Go ahead.
But they had to beat not only A&M, Houston had to beat the refs because that was the stupidest. That was the worst called game. We're talking about a Houston team that is top 10 in defense in the country, right? That never fouls. That's the whole point of why their defense is so good. They lock you down. They never send you to the foul line. And my goodness, the almost 2.5 to 1 advantage in free throws. If A&M could actually hit a free throw, they would have won by 30 and the game would have been over. I mean, that is how unbelievably ridiculous and noticeable it was with the refs last night. But Houston somehow found a way to get it done when, Drew, 4 of their starters fouled out by the time overtime started. 4. They had dudes that hadn't played like 3 minutes the whole year or on the court having to win the game. Is that a good thing for Houston, or is that a terrible kind of game to have as they head into Duke?
I mean, man, Joe, I guess now you're going up against Duke. Like, is Duke going to continue to get the calls that they've gotten in the past? Man, it might be kind of a tough run here for Houston. And I think it speaks to, guard play. Texas A&M, some people are, should they have even gotten into the tournament? But, hey, they had really good guards that got them there, and you could see it against Houston. So I think it just speaks to having good guard play in the tournament. It can really help you. And the Aggies almost got that huge upset. But, no, Joe, I would say it's probably not a good thing, especially going up against Duke here. But, hey, they got the win. And, hey, now they find themselves in the Sweet 16. So as the 1 seed, I don't know if I'm going up against them in that kind of portion of the bracket there, Joe.
Drew, I'm kind of with you here. I mean, that's a team that's been there and done that. BP, the only thing when I mean, honestly, I'm calling that game last night, and I'm going, I've never seen anything horrific like this. This is ridiculous in such a big game with a 1 seed, how unbelievably one-sided it was. Until I turned the Laker game on, and then I saw the Lakers had a 45-13 free throw advantage at home over the Pacers, and I was like, Now I get it. Yes, now I get it. Just when I thought I had seen the worst, watch the Laker refs at home. It does get worse there. But what did you think of that Houston win last night?
Well, at least the Lakers won their game. At least they took advantage of the free throws.
Yes, it's a good
Texas
point.
A&M. This is what I would. This is what I would say about if you want to spin this glass half full for Houston. I believe Texas A&M set a record last night for most free throws attempted in an NCAA tournament game in a loss. They had 45 free throw attempts. So if you, to Joe, kind of to what you're saying and to what Drew was just talking about, if you're able to overcome that and still win, and you can adjust the way you play. I mean, yes, we all know Duke is Duke, and they tend to get kind of a friendly whistle historically. But if you can avoid not sending your opponent to the free throw line 45 times, if you can avoid not having 4 starters foul out, which is not, I mean, shouldn't be that big of a challenge. Maybe Houston is in better shape. I feel that Duke, I mean, look, again, we all know the name on the front of the jersey. Duke is probably going to be a public dog, I think, in that game. I'm interested to see how the betting splits are. I wouldn't be surprised. And I think Gonzaga is going to be a public dog, too. I'm with Drew. I like Purdue in that game.
You guys joining us in the chat room, Instagram, shout out to you guys, as well as, of course, YouTube. Also, the those joining us via YouTube Shorts, we appreciate it. X, do us a favor, please hit that subscribe button, become part of the WagerTalk TV family if you haven't done so already. The amount of content that we've got here coming out, best bets, game previews, live content like this with Q&As all the time here. It is a betting community, guys. Join that family. Hit that subscribe button and do us a favor. Hit that like button as well. We certainly appreciate it. I'm just going to ask you guys this. Somebody asked me this last night. I think I saw one of the poll questions as who's going to win this year's national championship if you had to bet it. The 4 number ones were one choice, and then the field was the second choice. So how confident are we, Drew, that the winner of this year's national championship, that team is coming with a 1 next to their name?
Pretty like if it's straight up odds like that, I would take the 1 seeds. I think UConn's going to win if you just need one team. But looking at the bracket, I could see Houston, Purdue, and North Carolina all up for grabs there. So I would be on the side to take the 1 seed.
What do you think there, BP? Is it a 1 seed or not here this year?
Yeah, I mean, if you use some of these historical parameters, there are 6 teams that you have to rank in the top 25 offensive and defensive at KenPom, and you didn't lose your first conference tournament game. If you use those 2 qualifiers, only 6 teams can cut down the nets. 4 of those 6 are the number 1 seed. So yeah, if you force me to take that bet, as long as I'd be interested, what kind of odds you would, because if it was even money, my goodness, I would take the 4 seeds any day of the week over the rest of the field. I think the rest of those teams, no, I don't. Arizona, I mean. I said Marquette technically qualifies, but I don't.
Who is it
about projecting Marquette to win it?
If it's not a 1, where does it come from?
I mean, Arizona and Marquette are the only other teams that historically would qualify.
Yes,
and I don't feel great about Marquette. And like I said earlier, Arizona kind of always is sure to throw in that head scratching performance. So yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised a year after we had no number 1 seeds in the Final Four for the first time, I believe, forever. I would be shocked if it wasn't a 1 seed cutting the nets down, but that's why they play the game. So I'm excited to see Thursday and Friday.
Amen to that. Making it snow on Instagram wants to know, Drew, Bama UNC, is it under? UNC does seem like the kind of team that is more chameleon-like. They'll have no problem going up tempo or slowing it down. We know Alabama is at its best up tempo here. But I was pretty impressed that they ended up winning a game. They didn't control the pace last night here. So if you were looking at, I think, BP, what do we got? 173.5, I think is that number.
Yes.
North Carolina is going to play a little bit faster than Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon's only shot at winning that game was by slowing down that tempo here. It's a big number, Drew, in a Sweet 16 match, isn't it?
It really is. You need a clean ride. I mean, I guess what UNC scored 90 and 85 points in their first 2 tournament games. So they've shown the ability to score the basketball. I would just go back to the point, Alabama's game just finished 40 points under the closing total. So it's tough to get
Oof.
back on that horse and bet him to the over. But maybe like a hold your nose special, just bet the under and watch that clock, man, because that's going to be a tough one to kind of sweat out. But yeah, if you need something on the total, I would go with the under, Joe.
Yeah, it's interesting, B. We were watching that game last night with Alabama, watching the live odds. I mean, it didn't take much then 3 minutes into that game, and that total from 169 and a half, 170, where it closed, was down to 151 and a half in the first 5 minutes of the game. And I'm going, unbelievable here. So if you are not happy with some of these numbers out, I would just suggest give it a few minutes because the numbers popping in on the live are absolutely over the top, BP. Do you agree, though, 173 and a half? Just no way you can sweat out an over in that, can you?
No, it would. There was Alabama's first game. I'll say that, which went
Yes.
over with
Good
one.
point.
Alabama had 100 points with 5. But again, Charleston was the willing dance partner. Charleston's obviously a much less talented team than North Carolina. I would not feel good about betting the over. Again, these are historically high totals we're seeing from Alabama. There had never been a total of 173 in 30 years of tournament action before Alabama got involved this year. I'm looking at the WagerTalk.com live odds screen right now. The early bet splits, everyone's betting the over, which is interesting. So I don't know. The under wouldn't feel great though either. I feel in the sense that, man, I mean, those teams are there's gonna be a lot of points. I think it and this is kind of a cop out answer, but whatever. It's going to be somewhere in between the first two games, what we see with Bama. It's not going to be as ridiculous as the Charleston game, but we're going to see more points from Bama and North Carolina than we saw from Bama and Grand Canyon, because to your guys' point, North Carolina is willing to play fast, where Grand Canyon went into that game knowing they had absolutely 0% chance of winning a game if it was playing fast. North Carolina can just simply outscore Alabama if they wanted.
Big shout out to Seth joining us in the YouTube chat room. Wants to know, is anybody on Kansas State? How do we break this to Seth here, BP? Kansas State, yeah, they didn't win, Seth, and I'm only kidding him because he is a Kansas State alum. So we're well aware where Kansas State is right now. They're in the transfer portal, like everybody else who's not in the tournament right now. Unbelievable. Any of you guys dabble in the NIT or the CIT that going on right now? Did you have any action in there, BP? Because looks like a lot of folks are liking Chicago State here tonight. I love the fact that Ohio State's still in it, and so is Indiana State. You got to love that, too.
Yeah, so I played the NIT before both Monday and Tuesday of last week. 1-1, lost one there. I'm looking here, at some of the matchups that we've got. I didn't see anything today that jumped out at me. I thought all the numbers were pretty much spot on. We'll be interested to see, as the NIT continues. I know a lot of people right now are liking UNLV in the NIT. They're matched up with Seton Hall on Wednesday. We're starting to see lines for that. I'm going to investigate. I hadn't made it as far as Wednesday, honestly, in my handicapping for the NIT. But I can tell you that the two NIT games for tomorrow, Georgia and Ohio State, Cincinnati and Indiana State, I didn't see a substantial edge in those two matchups right off the bat. I thought the numbers were pretty spot on. So we'll dig into the matchups further, see if something pops out. But I think those lines are pretty good. What we've got for those two Tuesday games. I'll look at the Wednesday games here after we're done.
Tarleton State here tonight against Purdue Fort Wayne should be an interesting game as well. All right, so we got one more Survivor question. Those that might have joined our very own Kelly Stewart in the Survivor pool that she was a part of there. We got a question about whether or not Arizona should be used, Drew, as the Survivor pick for Thursday. Would you look at Arizona beating Clemson as a solid pick there for the upcoming Thursday round there with Survivor in mind?
Yeah, I would say so, because I guess you could point towards, in Survivor taking the biggest favorite, but at the same time, you're not allowed to use the same team twice, I believe. So you'd probably want to hold on to that UConn side because they are minus 11-point favorites. So kind of find that happy medium of Arizona laying the touchdown against Clemson. Yeah, I would probably circle the Wildcats as a good selection here in the Sweet 16, Joe.
Yeah, not a team that we often trusted there, BP, but are you in agreement? If you got a survivor here in the Sweet 16, the first one should be Zona?
Yeah, so it's the left side of the brackets playing Thursday, right? Memory off.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
of those 4 games, I would absolutely use Arizona because, like Drew said, you want to hold on to UConn, and then Illinois, Iowa State, North Carolina, Alabama. You look at those matchups, you compare them to Arizona, Clemson. I would be more confident about Arizona winning any of those 3 games than any of the other teams. Of the entire Sweet 16, if you only had to pick one for the entire round, it would be between Arizona and Marquette. That would be the
Mm.
two that I would be looking at in the Sweet 16. I'd be surprised if NC State beat Marquette. So I think it depends how much you like Arizona if you potentially wanted to save them again. So I don't know. I think those are your best options: Arizona, Marquette for the Sweet 16 in Survivor. It would definitely be one of those two.
Yeah, listen, roll the dice and take Illinois. There's no way Iowa State is getting out into the Elite Eight. I'm telling you right now. Too much offense, and offense wins at this point in the game here. And Illinois has that in bunches here. So, and then this way you still keep UConn, you keep Arizona, and you've got all your number ones and even a number two, and you're ready to roll there for any sort of survivor spots. All right, you guys are fantastic here. We certainly appreciate you hanging with us. Again, if you could hit the thumbs up for us, we'd certainly appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button if you're joining us here for the first time. Drew, tell us what you got going on at WagerTalk.com before we get out of here.
Joe, how about it? We got what NIT coming up this week. You guys talked about
Yes.
Georgia and Ohio State. How about the Dogs plus 8.5? They're playing some good basketball there. Mike White. I think that's a good matchup in the NIT. And we got opening day, guys, on Thursday. So got a 5% season win total up and available. I'm ready to rock, putting a lot of work on the bases here, Joe. So this week is starting to become a lot more baseball for Drew Martin, and that's a good thing. Good time of year, the weather's getting better, and hey, when baseball comes around, it's not much like opening day, Joe. I'm a huge fan. So check out MLB season, guys. Drew Martin, WagerTalk.com. Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yeah, I love it, Drew. Yeah, I put 2 under bets in for the future market because I can't stand either of these teams. So that'll be win total Red Sox under, and our Marlins, Drew, they're going to go through it this year here. They ain't hitting 78.5 win. Oh, hell no. That ain't happening.
How are they
Not
going to
unless
score?
BP. Who's pitching? Everyone's hurt now. Everybody. It's like,
and you throw in how they had a lot of lucky variants go their way, particularly in the first half last season,
yes.
Miami. So they're not going to get the ball bouncing their way a lot this year.
Like 33 and 14 and 1-run games. Like that is not continuing, people, at all. BP, what do you got for us? Locked, loaded, ready to roll tonight.
Monday was a study day. It's that simple. Coming off the tournament, we've got a few days. Drew mentioned opening day is just a few days away. The Sweet 16 we know is a few days away on Thursday as well. NBA, we're heading down the stretch. Right now, you can use code POWER30. You get $100 off a 30-day all access pass. One more time, that's POWER30. You get $100 off a 30-day all access pass. That'll give you the first month of the MLB season, rest of the NBA regular season, rest of the NCAA tournament. We had a great first month of the MLB season last year, 34-16. We are still 57% in the NBA this season, up over 33 units. So I would implore everyone, wt.buzz/BP is the place to go. Use code POWER30 to get your discount now.
Yes, big shout out to Professor Chris, by the way. Whistle Pig, if you're looking for a good rye. Not a bad suggestion there, PC. We certainly appreciate it. And guys, shout out once again, Instagram. Those of you joining us here are new, hit that subscribe button. Of course, those on X as well as YouTube, both shorts and in the full feed. We appreciate the time here, guys. We've got a lot more content coming up this week. Right around this time, come back and join us. Bring your questions, bring your best bets. We'll discuss them. And collectively, we will figure out the best way to go here. Until then, Best of luck on your plays here tonight, and we'll talk to you again soon. Good luck.